Hi, I want to share a little bit about how I deal with depression, and I just want to talk about like some things that have shown up um, in my life, and for you to consider like maybe what has happened in your whole life and how you can sort of identify those things and maybe work from that space, right? Some markers for me, and again, I'm not a doctor. I'm a yoga teacher, health coach. I have dealt with depression, even though for long periods I didn't know it was actually depression. I just felt like it was sadness. So, some things that have been identified is in learning about depression is that it's not, and this is just what I'm learning. So, this might be just something for you to contemplate, to think about. So, that we are imprinted by who we are raised by and what we see, how modeling is shown up for us. So for me, my mother was a single mom. I mean, my parents were married, they divorced. They were married, they got pregnant, they were living with one another, and then my father was deported back to India. He's from India, and my mom is First Nations in Canada, Ojibwe. And when he came back, it didn't work. I was already born. And I just watched my mother through the years be very sad. So that's one way that we learn some behaviors, including depressed states. And also, my mom being First Nations in Canada, First Nations people are very much not respected at all, and they're almost invisible. And so that's a hard thing to even say. And I say everything that I'm going to say right now that's been very processed. So I want you to know that there's been lots of ache I've shared through the years, and I'm still on my path to healing. And again, I'm not a doctor, this is just my own experience. And so we grew up with racism. Race was a constant issue growing up in Canada. Not being seen as a constant issue. Nobody wants to be invisible. Nobody wants to have them trailed in a store or literally like scooted out. Um, and so, and I learned to acclimate. I learned to assimilate even more so, in a lot of ways where I also abandoned my own family. And that's painful to say. So, modeling, dealing with racism. We were also poor. We lived in housing with other poor people of all different races. And that in itself is full of stress and trauma as well. Children have trauma, the parents have trauma. There's a lot more instability in those kinds of neighborhoods. Food insecurity, lots, tons. So grateful my mom chose to stop drinking when I was about 7. I remember that. She smoked for a little while after that, but not much long after that. But she was putting herself through school, and we had really tough times, and that is not fun either. And, that is a feeling. Um, there's not a lot of joy when you are dealing with racism, you're poor, you see your mother crying, you have food insecurity issues. As the eldest, I had to go to the local market, our convenience store, which was owned by a Korean family, and I had to ask for more credit, and we were constantly on credit. And abandonment. So my father, even though he was deported, I was abandoned. That's a whole other thing that I'll talk about maybe one day. But that is also a feeling of being abandoned is not, it doesn't make one feel good, safe, calm, or peaceful. So there's so many things that affect us that I didn't know it was depression until I moved to the States. But I just thought it was sadness. And I just thought the behavior that my mom displayed was pretty typical for families. And so I was on my own learning curve. And so there's so many reasons why we are the way we are. We are imprinted. It's our circumstances. We might come from places that are more war torn. We might be fleeing a country. We might be refugees. families of divorce, lots of different instabilities for like rape, a lot of abuse, verbal, physical, I mean, everything. Financial insecurity, so many different things. Yeah, and so it manifested at a young age and it showed up as sadness, I thought. And I moved to the UK, and I noticed in different periods in my life, especially when I moved and landed somewhere, I had a lot of stress and sadness. And again, I didn't learn how to drink in Canada. I didn't really drink that much until I moved to the UK. And then I got imprinted with how to drink in the UK. And that was its own ball of wax. And bad behaviors. And so, I had eating disorders as well, and I was bulimic from the age of 14 until the age of 28, but I was in the UK at around 19, 20, 21. Made it over to the States around age 22, 23. I went back to Canada for a little while. And, in those two moves to those two different countries, I had a lot of, you're dealing with culture shock. And there's a lot of isolation and building new friends. And to be honest, I think that kind of need to make friends and builds resilience, but I didn't understand it at the time. And I definitely had really bad coping skills. What I did do, what I've always done through the years, is the one through way was actually I read a lot. I used to read so much when I lived in London on my days off. I'd be hungover because we drink on the night of, at least, people who had days off. And then that whole day, the day off of, I would just like read in my bed. And it was like one of my favorite things to do. And I just always enjoyed reading. And I also enjoyed journaling. I used to smoke cigarettes, and so I would go to a coffee shop and just like bring my pack of cigarettes and just journal about my experiences, everything that I wanted to do, and smoke a cigarette and just sort of bat my eyes to the barista or whoever was around. And that was a way through. That I used to also tour the city. One of my favorite things in London was to I lived mainly in East London, both in Islington and Finsbury Park. And I would just like on the days off, if I wanted to be more out and about, I would just go and stop at a tube stop that I'd never been to, and just go up the stairs and just walk around the neighborhood. And over time, I started to learn to walk through the neighborhoods. And that was like a way for me to cope, but I didn't realize that was the way. It was living life. But you learn to self-soothe. You learn to really figure out what is important to you. I joined the community gym in London, in East London, in Islington, and I used to swim laps and just go on the treadmill. I would never stay that long, but I enjoyed like working on taking care of myself. I even took a class on creative writing at London University, City College. No, I have to look it up. It was in Islington. But I also still had really bad behaviors. And I learned that, again, exercise was a great way to move forward. So we have these things that have happened to us, and then we find things through the years. Like for me, I've done journaling, and when I moved to the States in 1999, it wasn't until a couple years later, I knew that I wanted to see somebody to talk about what was going on with me, even when I was in Canada, but I didn't really know, like it wasn't part of my family and our lexicon to talk about seeing a therapist or anybody like that. My mom had me actually see the pastor of the church, and I was like, I didn't want to talk to anybody because I did not want to get advice on like seeking God or anything like that. Listen, it's for some people, it wasn't for me. I knew that really at a young age, and that's for another conversation because I have a lot to say about that as well. But as soon as I moved to the States, I worked with this local group, and it was on a sliding scale, and it was just here in Washington, D.C. I was working in a restaurant, and through my health insurance, actually, I don't even think my insurance covered it. It was just on a sliding scale, and I was able to pay like dependent on how much I made. And I actually worked through them for about 14 years. So from around 2002 or 3 all the way to 2018. So about 15 years, but 13 solid years. There was about a year and a year off and another year off that I didn't work with people. But I worked with this one woman for 14 years out of those years. So yeah, maybe it was 16 years and then 14 years with her. Anyways, so I worked with actually a psychiatrist, and I was prescribed antidepressants alongside talk therapy. And I had a hard time finding a therapist. Just a couple people, but I felt as though I needed to, like, I had a hard time like telling somebody that I didn't want to work with them. And then eventually I just had to. Because my father was from India, I had a really hard time, actually, I had a hard time with Indian people. I thought that they judged me, and I literally didn't realize that I was making this association, and it was creating any kind of healing on the part of my relationship with this woman. She was Indian. I worked with her for like just a couple months, and in the end I just like couldn't work with her anymore. But I did find this woman, and we worked together for, about 15 years total, maybe 13 years of the 15, alongside antidepressants. And so I started on antidepressants, and they were really helpful. Now, I had 2 suicide attempts too. One was in 2002, summer of 2002 in Los Angeles. And the next one was in late summer of 2008, and that was in DC. And I was in Sherman Oaks Hospital in Los Angeles, and I was here in Sibley Hospital. And in the Sibley Hospital, I was actually at the hospital for 5 days, and I had an experience that was similar to Girl Interrupted, where you made art. You had everything stripped away from you. I brought my laptop, or my fiance or my boyfriend at the time brought my laptop, and they had to charge it for me in a different place. I was sad. I was sad that I did it. I was very upset with myself. And I remember calling the restaurant, because I worked in a restaurant at the time, and I had to get all my shifts covered. And, they were like, I just said that something was going on, not at all alarming. And I felt really sad that I couldn't tell anybody, because I also didn't, I was ashamed. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want people reaching out to me. I mean, I wasn't really on my phone or able to reach my phone or look at it. But there were some really cool spots in that, and that's actually where I did my first vision board. I actually don't really say that when I'm teaching vision board workshops, because it's like, I learned about this in Sibley Hospital when I tried a suicide attempt. But it really was. We were given this box, and within the box, we were able to to cut pictures out. And we had really blunt scissors, by the way. And, we had a lot of people that had a lot of different kinds of things that were going on with them. It wasn't just a suicide attempt. It was people that had all different kinds of mental issues. And so I remember cutting it out, like pictures of Woody Allen. I mean, I didn't know really what was happening with him at the time, or the level. And I just remember putting his picture in there because I loved his movies, and just all these different places that I wanted to travel to. And basically you wanted to put it in the box because it was like for you. And I actually thought that was such a sweet idea. And I think I have the box somewhere. And you put all the special things in the box, and it was just for you. So it wasn't like an open thing that you had to share with everyone else. And I thought it was like such a clever way. And to be honest, I really had just outside of why I was there, I was happy I could get a breather from my life. They were watching over me, and I was labeled as being bipolar. At the time, I remember thinking, that's a really interesting label. I didn't quite believe it. And the doctor, a white male, was like, she's very codependent. And I did believe that. And I started to do some research after that. But in that, I knew that I needed to stay with my antidepressants. I knew that I was in deep, but that visit, that time, I knew I needed to make a change. Now, that suicide attempt was brought on for financial issues. I didn't share with my partner the depth of the stress that I was feeling. I applied for some grants, some Pell grants, and some subsidized financing from like Canada, but I was really relying on loans and I didn't get all of it. And I had to cover like $10,000 on my credit card. And I was very stressed out about having a high APR on a credit card. And think about it, it's just fucking credit card. And at the same time, it's a big deal. Like I don't have family that's going to pay for that. This is like a real issue. Like this is a real like thing to be mindful of. I'm not like easily like it's not something that a normal person that might, whatever normal is, like someone who might just be able to get school paid for or at least have a cosigner. You don't want to put your school a huge $10,000 amount on your credit card because you can't pay that off right away. It's working in a damn restaurant. But yeah, so learning that what had stressed me out. And so I'm going to jump a little bit forward here because you see what causes it in your life. You see how you're affected by it, and you see ways through. So again, I decided I really wanted to push myself forward. I figured out a way. I moved money around. I didn't have to pay the huge APR that I was expecting to, but I didn't trust that I could get there. I felt hopeless. And this is a place that will show up over and over for me often. Just that sense of hopelessness. And also, I realized I didn't share with my partner at the time. And I'm still learning that right now. So I carried on with antidepressants, journaling, always reading my books, talk therapy. And I realized that I didn't want to be on antidepressants forever, but I stayed on my little island of antidepressants from 2008. I was pretty invested in making sure that I kept myself balanced. But in that feeling, in that world, I was sexually numb. I could feel I was on drugs. There's like this feeling where you just know you're like, hi, how are you? I'm good. And it's like, I didn't like that. I wanted to feel deep sorrow, and I was not feeling that anymore. And so I knew that drugs were not going to do it, but I stuck with it for a good solid, I tried a few things for a few years. Once 2008 landed, I remember staying on Wellbutrin, and then that was really intense. And then around 2010, I decided I was like, I need to get off of it, and I started to work with. I had a psychiatrist, and we worked on really sort of cutting it back and tapering down. And drugs are there to help you through really intense times. But it's been just, I think, over 10 years now, maybe coming on to 11, where I haven't been on any of that, but I have worked really hard because it was around 2002, 2001 where I started doing yoga, and yoga had started to show up more and more in my life. It wasn't showing up as much in these periods, meaning like it was making a difference in how I felt, but I'd go in and out of like being super committed and not. But it wasn't the end all be all. I'm definitely a proponent of taking drugs. But then I also started to eat better. It was around 2008 and after that I just started to run a lot more. I was already a heavy runner, and I knew that I liked to run, and it made me feel better. And so, but it's all like layered. Like it's not like, oh, I'm done with one and I'm going to start this in. It was like all these things were going along, but I realized, hey, when I slept better, when I exercised, when I did this yoga, when I ate this good food, when I really took care of myself, I felt more balanced. I felt more at peace. All the while not yet really dealing with the intergenerational trauma that I didn't fully understand. I was starting to get like downloads and really understanding it in moments of my life. Um, but it's hard when a lot of people don't think that there's anything that you've been through that's as painful as you have. And only recently are we discovering like how horrible First Nations have been treated and Aboriginal Indigenous peoples around the world, because that will affect you. That will make you feel like you are worthless. And there's no amount of green juice that's going to make you feel any different if the world cannot see you in that light. And listen, I am all about not needing attention from the outside world, and I've worked really hard for that. But I think it's really important when a certain section of a population is not actually regarded as anything except as savages or seen as a squaw, or being told that you don't belong, that your culture doesn't belong, to cut your hair, to acclimate, to not sing that, in beautiful Indigenous music, which actually makes me cry every time I hear it. So that will affect you. I'm about to get all teary here. So, some basic things that really help are I've learned to rely on friends. I've let go of inauthentic people in my life. I'm still sometimes caught up in it. I recently lost someone who I thought I trusted, but I realized maybe it was based on a more unauthentic understanding of who we thought we were for each other, just as friends. Um, you know, so having good friends, people that you can trust, people that you can share things with, eating well, which I do, which I help other people do as well. Reducing stress. This is something I'm always working on, and creating my toolbox. My toolbox includes. I love watching cat videos. I meditate. I mean, this one I'm always like, I'm going to meditate when my life is calm, when I have more time. It's like, no, you have to meditate for your life to feel more calm. But cat videos and animal videos, not just cat videos, but cat videos are like my favorite. Watching a good Netflix show